My name is Andy Stoiber, and this is the Journal of the Learning Sciences podcast. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with 3 of the 4 authors of JLS's 2023 Paper of the Year, Reconfiguring Science Through Caring Human Inquiry and Design with Pets. We're going to pick up right where we left off in the previous episode. If you find yourself disoriented, be sure to check out part 1 and or read the article in question. That should give you the grounding you're looking for. But without further ado, part 2 of my conversation with Professors Priyanka Parekh, R. Benjamin Shapiro, and Joseph Polman. What do you want people to know about this work? What were you hoping to communicate? And also, who do you want this to reach?
Well, first of all, there are many messages that readers can take from this paper. We really believe in kind of the core message of the paper, that we're saying that experiences are subjective, experiences are highly personal, shaped by how we see ourselves connected to these contexts. Experiences are very, very complex, and that we could use some support in making sense of them, which is where these intersubjective devices come in. I think one of the some of the big takeaways from this paper first is that we talk about complex systems and complexities and how learners must find a way to appreciate all of this, and because it's a big part of learning. Um, Advanced learners make better sense of complexity, so on and so forth. And right now, I'm just talking about the science education literature. But we often do not have great ways to make that kind of complexity accessible to the learners. I think that's one big thing that this paper speaks to, is that we do need excellent ways to make these kinds of complexities accessible to learners, which is where these filters come in. And then secondly, even when we make these accessible to learners, we must understand how do learners lend themselves to these kinds of contexts, which is where the relationship piece comes in. Learners are definitely not blank canvases. They have rich experiences of their own, which helps them see the world in these very, very different ways. And even when we facilitate these processes, they're going to be excellent in some ways, as in, because they are embedded within a relationship, they're going to have this learning experience. It is going to give it a lot of lasting power, a lot of staying power. So, what w- some big things that we talk about is that these children kept coming back to this context of learning, essentially understanding the pet animals' behavior repeatedly, and saw the whole process through and tried really hard to understand, where am I going wrong? Am I going wrong somewhere? So those are often those complex aspects of inquiry that we do not often pay attention to when we are trying to understand what does it mean to learn in this context. So an appreciation of that complexity and understanding that no matter how much we try, we're always leaving something on the table. That humility, those are the things that I think anyone reading this paper could take away from it.
And if I may, I'd love to just recap and retell aspects of what Priyanka just told another time in a slightly different way, um, highlighting some things. We talk in STEM education a lot about wanting to have an understanding of these complex ecologies of nature, culture, and we talk about nature culture systems in this article, where humans, more than humans, are in these complex relationships and ecologies. And rather than starting at the big levels of broad complexity, we decided to start at home. And the place at home is where teens have a caring relationship with their pets at home. And homes are ecologies too. They're these micro ecologies. And
as our
then,
neighborhoods, right? We sort of trace
yeah,
this expanding.
yeah. And then we introduced these tools, these augmented reality tools, doggy vision and kitty vision, to help a child see the ways that their pets um, perceive the world through sight and how that's different. And then they used that understanding to design investigations and then design some tools and environments for their pets to try to improve their home ecology for their pets' experience. And as Priyanka said, the fact that they had the caring relationship was the thing that kept driving the inquiry and the scientific learning and design based on scientific understandings forward. Contrary to the notion that you need to be a cold cognator, it helps to be a hot carer with your pet to push your inquiry forward, and that the learning was driven by that, and their commitment to caring about and for their pet, and being in relationship with these other creatures that they knew weren't exactly like themselves.
So this project is meeting kids, high school age students, learners, right, at their home where they're in an environment that they know well, and telling them to engage with something they care about, their pet. I have pets and I love them, right? And it's that we know that when people are interested and care about a thing, they will learn more and be more interested in inquiry, right? And around science in particular, how do we get people to think more scientifically, engage in scientific practices? This study is showing, have them engage with and study the things they care about, the animals in their house, the people, right? The things around them that are great fodder for scientific inquiry.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add to that in addition to inquiry being about the experience of pets in the home, it's also a reorienting of both power, positionality, and other relational dynamics with respect to the pet and the home, right? Like the participant in the study, the human participant and the animal participant, they are roommates. They live together. They are both inhabitants of the home, which is an environment that they share. And so as people, the environment itself is often a thing that they care about, right? Many young people make choices about how to lay out their rooms and what art to put on the wall, and whether it's posters of heartthrobs or favorite data visualizations or nothing, or painting the walls black. Like the design of the environment is a thing that young people do all the time in relation to their own aesthetic preferences and their own experience in that world. And part of what we were trying to do is center the togetherness of human and non-human animal in a shared space that is also situated in a broader shared space, right? So there's an example, I believe in this paper, maybe one of the others, of like recognizing a pet's sightline to a neighbor's pet and the ways in which that too was relevant to the animal's experience. So you can think of it as these sort of expanding circles of presence and situativity that is shared by human and animal. And that's very different than the sort of distant, objective, cold view of science that is so often presented.
Yes, and maybe to be a little provocative here, given this is looking at learning happening in homes outside of schools, to be devil's advocate, what does this mean for science education more broadly? How might schools interpret this work or take it up? Is this meant for thinking about science learning outside of schools as something valuable in itself, that can be happening? This kind of inquiry is happening with your pets at home. You don't need the science class to be doing these things. where are you hoping that this work puts pressure potentially, or where it shines light? Because I think it's shining lights on
I
lots of
think we
things that we
probably all
don't.
three have different answers to that.
I think one place it puts pressure on is to recognize relationships as sites for learning. That would be number one. And also the importance of perspective taking and care as sort of something that shapes learning. And I say that because we have talked about the other scholars who inspired us to do this. But for example, science learning with indigenous learners, Megan Bang and Ananda Marin's work. And very often we do receive some pushback about why we are trying to sort of speak about more than human creatures, giving them the exact same kind of agency that human beings have. And more importantly, what does it mean for us to say that a tree has agency, or a rock has agency, or a frog has agency? And once we realize why we need to say that, it's because it draws attention to these small changes that the more than human world is going through, is constantly going through, and that as a site for learning. That once you attribute that relationship as important, and then these creatures as having agency, then you are immediately drawn to the small ways in which they're changing and the learning that takes place within those moments. So that I would say is something that's very, very important, and that we need to recognize these in moments of learning, irrespective of the context. Home and other informal contexts are, of course, the easiest place to start with. But if we could recognize at least some of these, and in whatever ways possible within more structured learning environments, um, I think we would be able to capture learning in very, very different ways, and that would benefit the field.
Ben, you want to say something, or you want?
Yeah, you'll see this. We'll share the grant proposal with you. Originally, it was very much our desire to begin this work out of school, including in collaboration with science teachers, and to chart ways in which some of the perspectives and methods that we initially develop outside of school could be brought into school. And some of the work we did along the way, some of which has, been presented in papers at ISLS, or posters in ISLS, was very different than the structure of this study. So, for example, we did a study that was hosted by the Campus Science Museum at Boulder, where families came and they didn't bring their pets, because you can imagine you have a small room in a museum and like the chaos that would unfold if you had like a dozen dogs and cats in this little room. But they brought their knowledge of their pets and their familial relationships, right? So if you had parents and children who were siblings, there's also a lot of structure in those relationships with each other and also with their pets, where then we did inquiry activities using some of the wearables that included like exploring the campus, exploring art in a museum, etc., through the sort of sensory perspectives of animals, and formulating questions, things that they would want to find out about their pets' experiences, or observations that they were making that they think give them shine new light on the experiences of their pets. Um, and so the idea was, well, maybe there's ways in which, science classes could have some activities like this, and then the homework isn't um, maybe the more dry homework that students are used to getting, but instead it's like doing inquiry at home with your family, with your pets, and then bringing back knowledge to the classroom. One study we did, so Annie Kelly and I, together with some collaborators at Utah State University, so Kristen Searle and Colby Toffel-Grell, who's now at Columbia, we ran a like week-long summer camp in Utah, where you've designed tech to improve the quality of life of animals in their lives. So some of them were pets and some of them were like farm animals, right? And so they were,
Love
so
that.
like, for example, there's a goat that would like not stop headbutting the other goats in the pen. And so like that was a thing one of the youth wanted to work on. And so in that case, they were building things and bringing them home to try out and then bringing them back. And often they were very fragile and would get destroyed in the schlepping back and forth. But we're very much interested in the ways in which experiences like this could also create richer bridges between learning that happens in school classrooms and learning that happens at home with the multi-species families that a lot of young people enjoy.
And if you can indulge me, I'll add a little bit on too.
Yes, please,
Uh,
please.
so big yes to all of this. And thanks for bringing us back to the who we want to reach and why kind of question that you started with, Andy. The and I echo the notion that I'd like this to influence what's going on and considered possible both in out of school environments and in school environments. And as far as school environments go, I just want to lift up, in recent years, we've been collaborating with multiple people on multiple symposia at AERA and ISLS. And one body of work that I'm particularly excited about is Ashlyn Pearson and company's work on talking about emotional configurations in STEM classrooms. So to me, part of the influence that we want to be part of the conversation that's pushing emotion and relationships as key to what goes on in formal STEM classrooms. That's just naming one. We couldn't name them all, but there's a whole bunch of folks working on that that I think is a great trend. And we would love it if not only learning sciences researchers and designers, but teachers and policymakers understand that looking at the ecologies as something that we need to have an emotional commitment to, thinking about relationships across species as key to doing that, and integrating the scientific inquiry and investigation into that. Um, and then the other thing, as far as both in school and out of school, this is focusing on that home level ecology, but these kinds of investigations can be done with wider ecologies too. And we're interested in doing that. We've got a grant proposal that Priyanka and colleagues and I have been working on to do that in informal STEM settings. But I think a lot of folks could be doing this kind of thing, not just with pets and homes, but in local ecologies. And folks are doing this kind of thing, coastal investigations in Washington State, folks doing great things there, and so on and so forth.
Amazing. I mean, I know I'm excited to heavily cite this work as it feels part of a paradigm shift in, what is acceptable and allowed in the learning sciences. And, of course, encourage everyone to read this, right? And see how they respond to it and think about taking it up. And now I think I have two questions left. We'll see if we can get to them, but I want to make sure I get to the one that Lima Berland, co-editor-in-chief of the Learning Sciences, she sent in to me as I asked her since I was meeting with this group. And so Lima has this to ask. Looking over the past few decades, I see the emphasis on the relationships, humanity, politics, and ethics within learning spaces as moving from the edges of our community towards the center. Let's say we succeed in moving educational practice and policy. What's next? Do you see new work sitting on the edges waiting for its moment?
I can start off this conversation by saying that there's likely a lot out there, but I think the value of this question lies in um, the fact that we now recognize that um, ethics, care, perspective, relationships, they're all relevant to the epistemic process. That's a really big shift because look at the body of literature that STEM education and learning sciences was producing a couple of decades ago. We were not having these conversations. The fact that we now realize that who we are as individuals, where we stand in the grand scheme of things, and how complex our lived experiences are, recognize recognizing that in some way, shape, or form, this is going to shape the epistemic process is a huge leap. And it is my hope that we and others continue along this line of inquiry to see where it goes.
I can't agree more. Like I said paradigm shift because, and I say that in the Kuhnian sense, like it really does feel like a massive, important shift in the guise of like moving from a cognitivist to a socioculturalist, to really bridging these things and understanding humans fully and how they exist in their environments and their emotions and politics. Ben, did you have?
Yeah. So I think Joe and I were both in the audience for a symposium at ISLS this year on competent outsiders. We're both there, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I found it both interesting and intriguing, and also frustrating and disappointing. And um a- and and the reason why is that I felt that, with one key exception, I think Ravit Golan Duncan was probably the strongest exception to this, on of the presenters in this symposium. There there was this pervading assumption that there's a bunch of like benighted scientific experts who are the producers of truth, who remain a slim segment of our society. And then it's sort of up to most of the rest of us to become competent outsiders who have the literacies needed to be able to understand the knowledge that those experts are producing. And certainly, while I think that is a reasonable framework to think about knowledge production in some domains, it's far from an adequate account of the ways in which and the places in which and who can produce knowledge, and the ways in which many of us are insiders in lots of spaces, and without any formal credentialing. And I think we as a field need to continue this journey, um, to really consider the ways in which there can be um, multitudes of knowledge producers who have different positionalities, different formal, informal qualifications, different relations, different values. And um, I hope that the field will increasingly move to recognize that, including to take up the idea that different people are going to want to make knowledge or make sense of the world or knowledge claims through different epistemic frames. And, a thing I found very frustrating in that session was this assumption that only the sort of, I almost put it in like Calvinist terms, like only this elect few get to decide on the epistemic frame and then what the knowledge claims are within that frame. When in reality, different people have different motives, different desires, different needs for information, different personal experiences. And I see this work as suggesting ways in which we could rethink how we both do and teach and communicate about science and science learning, but also learning beyond what we would today consider scientific. There may be folks who read this article and say this isn't science, right? That is some of the kinds of pushback we've gotten, and we would contend that it is. But we're all good, but given that we already have that almost sort of like science policing dynamic around this work, I think that's pretty likely. I also think we are in a moment of crisis around, scientific mis and disinformation, for example, around vaccine science, where some of the perspectives that were presented in that symposium are totally needed and are valuable and valid. But we as a field need to figure out how do we envision learning and communicating and being civic actors in a world where so much can be contested, and sometimes things that ought not be contested are being contested because of people's, I would consider them antisocial motives. A lot of motivations to continue things that are destroying the planet are not what I would consider like generous motives, more greedy ones. But that we should not let the existence of that phenomenon and our desire to build up structures of resistance to it get in the way of us thinking about more pluralistic structures and methods for heterogeneous knowledge production.
This is so fascinating. This to me is the question of the time. How are we wrestling with expertise? Who gets it? It's so exciting to be with people who think about this. Joe,
yeah, I mean, I don't think
word.
anyone's more of an expert in my dogs than my wife and I are, to a degree. But like, if my dog is really sick, the vet does have a bunch of knowledge that I don't have.
That helps. Yeah. The two things that came to mind that resonate with the rest of the discussion for me about what's next and what we need next are interdisciplinarity and considerations of power. And I don't feel like I know exactly where we're going to be going with this, but I feel like as a field and as a species in relation with other species on this planet, we need to benefit from not being stuck in our disciplinary silos and thinking about the epistemic processes just as informed by single disciplines and their practices, but instead think about agents acting in the world and on the world in relationship with other agents, and that the growing considerations of the power dynamics in those are key, where we need to think about not overly centering the human or the disciplinary learning in the old school sense, but instead equipping one another to act to create a healthier world that's better able to thrive and be sustainable. Those are the thoughts that I have.
Phenomenal. Final question. As you all are doing recognizable, amazing work that received and continues to receive a lot of resistance, I'm wondering if you have some words for folks who might be in a similar boat, but maybe young and emerging scholars that find themselves doing work that is getting pushed back on, that might be counter-hegemonic or against the mainstream, and maybe folks from backgrounds that have not been represented in the academy well. What, if you have any advice, any hopeful words of encouragement, what that might be?
Remember why you started this. That would be the first thing we would like to talk about. Remember what brought you to this work, why you're doing this, why you're spending like so many hours a week, why you're thinking about this work before you fall asleep at night, and let that let that be sort of your driving force. If you feel like you need this work, there are plenty other people who feel that way too. So stick it out, show the work a lot of love, a lot of care, keep coming back to it, even if you see a lot of projection. I know that although we're doing research, we talk about loving our work and these kind of topics very frequently. So yeah, I would say the love for the context and the love for the work we do helps us persevere despite sort of these brutal rejections that we face.
Oh, thank you. That's really personally relevant, and I love to hear that right now. So I can't hear that enough. Thank you.
I'd love to build on that going next and say that a key part of it as well is the relationships, and lean on and care about and care for one another, and think about who else seems to be supporting these perspectives. If you feel like someone's telling you your work is unmoored, remember the people who inspired you and build relationships with those people. And being in these collaborations with people coming from different perspectives, like this one has been so sustaining for me in my career. The collaborative groups working on projects and papers, and not just including the researchers and scholars, but the teachers I've gotten to work with and the out of school educators I've gotten to work with. Those relationships sustain me to maintain that commitment about why I was doing it in the first place.
Again, so relevant and resonant thing. Yeah. Embarrassment of riches. Ben, do you have any last words?
Yeah,
to leave
well,
us
I
with?
mean, I agree with both of them. There have been many moments over the last decade, both within this project and without, where Joe has been not just a meaningful and supportive research collaborator, but person in my life who, when things have been hard, has been someone to go to and lean on, and it's really made a big difference for me. And I'm very grateful for that. I'd like to think I've at least slightly reciprocated, but don't know if it's possible. And stay unmoored. Like, I don't know about the rest of you, but the projects I've done that have been the most successful have tended to be the ones that people have given me the most pushback on when I've proposed them or tried to do them, whether like, oh, that's too hard, it could never work, or why would you do that? That's already failed, or, this is unmoored, whatever it is, right? Like, I think if you keep pushing at something you're passionate about, you're more likely to do something high quality and interesting than taking the easy path. The easy path is also often the boring path.
This is fantastic. Wow. This has been such a privilege. I am feeling so inspired and hopeful to keep on doing the work. So thank you all so much. Thanks for listening to the Journal of the Learning Sciences podcast. I'm your host and the show's producer, Andy Stoiber. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, subscribe, and comment. If you have an idea for a show, please email us at journalofthelearningsciences@gmail.com. Oh, and a quick note. The views expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and me, your host, and don't represent the official positions of ISLS. Thanks for listening and learning.